Good morning. Our text this morning begins in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." The law of retribution, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is given in the law for cases of assault, murder, and false witness. This is all stuff that we've studied in our Law of Moses class. Right? If somebody falsely accuses you of something and they're found out, that person is supposed to bear the penalty that you would have borne if you'd been found guilty. Right? That's what the law of retribution tells us. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Right? Wound for wound, blow for blow, it's expressed in other places. But it's meant for those kinds of cases. Assault, murder, bearing false witness. From Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount this morning, though, it's clear that Israel, by Jesus' time, has taken it to apply to personal grievances as well. They've taken this law of retribution and said, I'm going to apply that personally. Somebody does something to me, well, it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It says so in the Bible. Right? How many people do we know that pull that kind of trick? It says so in the Bible. What Israel has done with this commandment, the law of retribution, is use it as a proof text. Right? We've not cornered the market on proof texting. Right? Modern man didn't invent proof texting. Israel's been proof texting since the very beginning. And they were doing it here, in taking an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth to apply it in these personal situations. Now, they should have known better. And we say that every time that we look at something on the Sermon on the Mount. You know, in all of these antitheses that Jesus has brought out, you've heard this, but I say this. In every one of these cases, we've said Israel has looked at the law, and they've either misunderstood it, misinterpreted it, or the misinterpretation is so bad that they've had to do some twisting and contorting to get things to where they have them. Because the law does not actually lead someone to the conclusion that they can take vengeance on their neighbors for personal grievances. What does the law say about vengeance? It says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Right, that's all part of the same commandment in Leviticus. You shall not take vengeance, you shall not bear a grudge, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's from the law. That's not something new that Jesus has come up with, contrary to the law. And it's that standard of the law that Jesus is promoting in today's lesson in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't take vengeance. Or in Jesus' words, do not resist the one who is evil. Or the apostles Paul and Peter phrase it as, don't return evil for evil. Right? Paul uses that in a couple of different places. Peter uses it in 1 Peter. Don't return evil for evil. Don't retaliate. If someone does something to you, don't retaliate. Instead, our thinking is to run in completely the opposite direction. Just like we've seen with all of the other things. Right? Israel looks at the law, looks at, do not murder, and says, oh, I can do everything up to murder. And Jesus says, no, you need to be going in the other direction. All right, does the same thing with adultery. Oh, it's okay if I do everything up to adultery, but I'm not actually going to cross that line. Jesus says, forget the line. You shouldn't even be able to see the line, whatever that is. You go the other direction. Right? Don't even look at somebody with lustful intent. Likewise, in this case, instead of thinking, well, what can I do to this guy who has done this wrong to me? Jesus says, you need to turn your thinking the other direction. Instead of thinking, what can I do to this guy? What can I do for this guy? Now, that's why Jesus offers this teaching. It is outrageous to the sensibilities of the world. Right? Because whenever you have somebody slap you, what is your first thought? Your gut reaction. And notice, by the way that Jesus expresses this, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, it's interesting that he specifies the right cheek. In antiquity, just as today, most people were right-handed. How does a right-handed person slap you on your right cheek? It's not this, it's this. A backhanded slap. It's a deep insult. Just as much, even more so in antiquity than it is today. Right? The slap itself is only half of the trouble. The fact that somebody thought that they could backhand you, that's insulting, besides actually hurting your face. It's deeply insulting. If somebody treated you that way, your natural inclination is to think about slapping them back or worse. Right? Not only have you got to deal damage to them, but you've got to insult them back. Right? That's what your gut says. But Jesus says, no, that is retaliation. That is avenging ourselves. And he says, run in entirely the opposite direction from that. Instead of putting up your defenses, instead of retaliating, he says, make yourself even more vulnerable. Turn the other cheek. Offer him another shot. Oh, you want to slap me once? Well, slap me again. Slap me twice. Jesus says, even if someone would take you to court and literally sue the shirt off of your back, give him your cloak too. Don't try to get back at him. Jesus says, let him have your cloak as well. And remember, the cloak, the outer garment in antiquity, is by far the most important piece of clothing you have. Right? We saw several laws in our Law of Moses class about the cloak. Right? If you're loaning something to a poor man, you're not allowed to take his cloak as collateral, because the law says that's his blanket. What's he going to sleep in at night? Right? In antiquity, that's true of everybody. Right? Your cloak is what you sleep in. It is the most necessary part of your clothing in antiquity. And Jesus says, you know what? If somebody's going to sue the shirt off of your back, give him your cloak too. Run in completely the opposite direction of the way the world invites you to go. If someone compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Right? And this is, I think it's fairly well known that in the Roman Empire, a Roman soldier who is traveling could compel someone, just whoever he comes across, to carry his burdens for 1 mile. Right? If he's off traveling to another assignment and he's tired of carrying all of this gear he's got to carry, he can say, you, come here, carry this for 1 mile. And he's legally able to do that. Right? You are legally obliged to go that 1 mile for him. Jesus says, instead of, think of this, by the way. Think if that system was just transplanted into 21st century America. Let's say a Roman soldier came up to you today and said, hey, you, carry my rucksack for 1 mile. All right, people would be outraged. You would never stop hearing about it from Rush Limbaugh and Fox News and Alex Jones. there would be an outcry. The government is going too far, stepping on our rights. Jesus says, no, the correct response, the kingdom response, is don't just go the 1 mile, go 2 miles. In every case, give more than what is bargained for. Because the standard for how we treat other people is the standard of love. Don't take vengeance, don't bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself. And if we take that as our standard, if we love our neighbors as ourselves, then we will find all kinds of opportunities to express that, to give. Not just to the one who steals from us, but to the one who begs and borrows too. Which is why Jesus brings that in here at the end of his teaching in verse 42. Give to the one who begs from you. Do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Right, and it's interesting that he brings those two things in here, along with the other things that he's already talked about. Because, it's one thing for somebody to slap you in the face or to try to take your clothes from you. It's another thing entirely for somebody to beg or ask to borrow something. They're not wronging you if somebody begs or asks to borrow. And yet, what's our natural inclination? If we see somebody that we know is going to ask us for something, going to beg us for something, going to ask to borrow something. If you've ever experienced this, I don't know if it's run this way for you as well, but sometimes it can feel like a burden. Oh, that guy's gonna want money. This guy's gonna want to borrow this, that, or the other. Oh, he's coming back asking again. In our hearts, it's easy to act like that other person is wronging us by asking us for things. And so Jesus lumps that in here too, because the same standard of love covers that as covers everything else. And if we're going to offer the other cheek, then of course we're going to give to the one who begs. We're not going to refuse the one who would borrow if we're applying that same standard evenly. We do that instead of begrudging their asking, because Jesus says, remember, don't take vengeance and don't bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself. So the call this morning is to give people better than what they ask, not to stand on our dignity, as it were, to get our hackles up and stand on our rights. That is the way of the world. The way of Jesus Christ is to love your neighbor as yourself. Giving people better than what they ask, this is the way that followers of Jesus Christ act. It should be the clear mark of a Christian. And so let us do and act as we've been commanded. If you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, we invite you this morning to turn away from the life of sin and turn towards this pattern of neighbor love, obedience to God in Jesus Christ. Turn away from your sins, confess Jesus is Lord, and be baptized into his death, burial, and resurrection for the remission of your sins. If you're subject to the invitation, won't you come as together we stand and sing?